Good afternoon or good morning if you're on the West Coast. Welcome to everyone to our webinar on safe and responsible AI. We have an incredible set of panelists that I'm eager to learn from, and I'm sure you are too. Trooper Sanders, our CEO, will introduce these speakers in just a moment. The pace of AI adoption, especially generative AI with tools, has picked up and is fast reaching an inflection point. BDT and partners have stepped into this interesting space programmatically, digitally, and policy-wise. Programmatically, we are deploying and experimenting with various forms of AI, including generative AI. In a couple instances, just to highlight, Wyatt is our higher education chatbot, helping students and advisors with this year's FAFSA, getting that financial aid. We have partnered with NAVA PBC in a first-of-its-kind exploratory project that seeks to answer if generative and predictive AI can be used ethically to reduce administrative burdens for benefit navigators. In various forums, we are advising federal and state leaders and industry in responsible development of AI, and this webinar is part of those efforts. It's part of our AI Learning Hub, which seeks to establish exploratory environment for a diverse group of participants to safely test responsible ways to use AI to improve the delivery of public benefit programs. We are all learners in AI, so I would encourage you to participate, and we'll put a link in the chat for you to do so, and we'll have something at the end as well. And in AI, we're working with really knowledgeable industry experts such as Google.org, GitLab Foundation, and OpenAI. And we have really knowledgeable supporters such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Balmer Group, and Wells Fargo. And the Rockefeller and Patrick J. McGovern Foundations have provided support to the AI Learning Hub and thereby this webinar. Let's go over a couple of rules of the road here. We are recording this. We may use it for other purposes to help other learners along the way. If you have any tech issues, please reach out to B Sharp, Brian. His email address is up there. He solves all problems. He's our jack of all trades. Please enter any questions you have for the panel using the Q&A feature, and towards the end, we'll try and get as many of those questions answered as possible. And if you don't happen to get your question answered, please feel free to reach out to this generic email or even me personally afterwards, srockwell@bdttrust.org. Finally, I just wanted to say that human service leaders find themselves considering all kinds of options in AI. In fact, some of our survey work in the field with government leaders has found that when you ask the question sort of on the risk opportunity around AI, a majority of human service leaders lean towards the opportunity side. But when you ask specifically, what are you concerned about or excited about, that list of risks is a lot more than the list of opportunities. It's an interesting dynamic, and we're going to get into that today, and I'll hand over to Trooper Sanders, BDT CEO, to introduce the panel and get the conversation going.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is really exciting. BDT, Benefits Data Trust, we've been around for nearly 20 years, and our sole focus is to ensure that the system works for people in need. And so many of you are involved in leading agencies, running programs, delivering benefit services and other human services to people all across the country. And you know what important and hard work that is. And you know that things like artificial intelligence and other things that are out there provide potentially an opportunity to aid your work, but we also need to ensure that it's done correctly and safely. And this is something that it takes a village to figure out how AI should evolve in society. And I couldn't be more excited to have this extraordinary group of leaders, some of whom I've known for a couple of weeks, others I've known and followed their work for nearly a decade. So this is really exciting. I will quickly introduce our panelists and then jump into the first question for the discussion. First is Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. She is CEO of Humane Intelligence, and she is U.S. Science Envoy for Artificial Intelligence. She is one of an extraordinary group of scholars and leaders whose work I've learned so much from over the years, and she has done so much to advance the field of AI and society. Second is Erin Mote. She's CEO of Innovate EDU, an extraordinary organization that is grappling with some of the issues that we're talking about for public benefits and human services in the education arena. Miriam Vogel is president and CEO of Equal AI. She is also in another setting, my boss, but she is the chair of the National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee that I am also honored to serve on, and someone who I've known for many, many years. And finally, Lori Freeman. She is CEO of the National Association of County and City Health Officials, and works with the extraordinary public servants who are trying to ensure we stay healthy and that we have a better sense of wellness and well-being across any number of areas. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So let's just jump right in. Can you just describe maybe briefly what is the promise and opportunity of AI that excites and intrigues you the most? Maybe we'll begin with Rumman, please.
Hi, yes, and thank you for inviting me, Trooper. It's good to see you. It's been a bit. So what are the things that excite me the most? I think we're already seeing amazing benefits in certain fields, and the two I like to point out are medical and weather prediction. I think the medical one, a lot of people are very familiar with. The CRISPR technologies that we're seeing, a lot of the bioidentical genetic medications, there are like optimistic yet realistic predictions that we may do things like cure cancer in our lifetime, which is, it's a phenomenal thing to think of. One that is actually very personal, very close to me, it's actually weather prediction. Today I'm in New York, but I'm usually based out of Houston, Texas, and it is a place where climate change has greatly impacted people's living conditions, right? Because of hurricanes. They used to call them 500-year hurricanes, and then we had 3 of them in a row, right? My parents lost one of their homes in Hurricane Harvey. So it's really important. So because of better weather predictions, and there are actually reports on this by GAO, some of this technology has been built by Google DeepMind, we're actually able to better understand hurricanes almost a week in advance where they will hit and when. And that lead time is really critical to people figuring out whether they want to evacuate, protecting themselves, their homes. And it literally is a matter of security of our homes, our properties, and ourselves. So those are the 2 things that I am optimistic about. Certainly there's a lot to talk about on things that can be improved, but thank you for asking the question. The only other thing I'll say is, in the field of responsible AI, it's really important for us to have an affirmative vision. So we know what we don't want, but we have to actually also figure out what we want so that we aim towards getting there.
That's great. Please, others, please.
Happy to jump in and underscore. I think Rumman said it perfectly. I also have a similar thread that we're AI net positive at Equal AI, really excited about what can happen. This discussion of AI to bring more opportunity and efficiency, whether it's getting rid of the mundane task. I personally am grateful for the spell check and the editing tools. But when we're thinking even of the more consequential cases, how can it be more exciting than solving for cancer? There was recently a tool, Sybil, created by Mass General and MIT. And in one study, it was shown to predict the development of lung cancer a year ahead, 86 to 94% of the time. And education is the area where I'm so excited about the possibilities, where Taiwan has shown leadership in creating an AI tool, a chatbot, to work with its K through 12 students to practice their speaking skills. We'll get into some of the downsides later, but obviously those tools are significantly improving people's lives and opportunities, as long as we're careful to ensure that we know who it's built for. And as Kathy O'Neill always reminds us, for whom could this fail? Because if we're talking about the cancer studies, we have to make sure we know, is the doctor, is the nurse giving a false negative? Because how much worse is that than not having the innovation in the first place? With the chatbot, if we're allowing our children to learn basic skills and it's responding to our children, we have to make sure that the language is not racist and sexist, and then it's accurate. So I think the opportunities, we're just scratching the surface on how it can and will change our world if we're intentional at this moment.
Well, I'm happy to jump in there. I am also most excited about the application of AI in education because I think the potential of AI right now and the use cases for me that are green are about making the invisible visible. And in our education system, particularly here in the United States, but also globally, so much around opportunity and our equity gaps is actually about access to information and access to opportunity. So, Trooper, you talked about the FAFSA. I'm going to talk about founding a school in downtown Brooklyn and having to identify internship opportunities for all of my high school seniors, because we know that when our young people have the ability to access real life learning experiences, their chance of success in college and career goes up tenfold. And so how do we take the information that's really been the purview of maybe a college counselor who serves one college counselor to 1,000 students and make that information visible for young people to navigate their own paths, but also for us to unlock opportunity? And so I think there's a lot of promise right now in the use cases that help us take information that has been siloed, that's been only able to be accessed through coded language or coded knowledge, and to unlock that opportunity, not just for young people, but for communities that are the most marginalized. And, we need to talk about the promise and the peril of AI. And so, especially when it comes to our young people and what we need to do. But for me, there's an enormous opportunity to unlock opportunity.
And I can hop in here and round out some of these great comments. So from the public health perspective at that county, critical county, city, local, jurisdictional level, there is so much promise for AI and really the evolution of AI, I should say, because the early machine learning models that formulated the basis for AI really have been in use a long time in public health in the world of managing large aggregate data sources, analyzing them quickly, really helping to feed outbreak analysis and disease surveillance and things like that. But we're talking about new and different uses for them that are evolving in the blink of an eye very rapidly. So enhanced disease surveillance, for example, but layering upon that the use of really intelligent social media gathering algorithms that help to complement real data with sentiment, public sentiment on the ground, to help you target important key, sometimes culturally appropriate messages for certain populations. That's what we're really talking about, the promise being in public health, really taking this learning even deeper to help us to understand populations better, how to serve them, how to message them, and how to really help them to make the right decisions around their health and their community. So that's one example. There's so many others, but in health education, the ability to translate in the blink of an eye something in 60 languages that might have taken a translator a lot longer to do in the past. And as the others said, there's a lot of worry well in some of these areas as well in terms of risk, but the promise, I think, is much greater for the citizens of our jurisdictions in terms of being able to improve and act for themselves as well. So I'll stop there. I know we have a lot to cover.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's now turn to some of the concerns about AI, and what concerns do you have about AI? And can you just share an example of your work that is perhaps tackling a challenging use case, or stopping harm, or trying to set AI on a better path? Maybe Miriam, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think, fortunately, when we're talking about AI, what's an area of our work and lives where it has not had an impact, or it has not permeated in some way? And that's for better or for worse. There's some well-known examples in the healthcare space where algorithms have led to unintentional, by the doctors and healthcare providers, racist, classist healthcare offerings. And really some of the worst case outcomes that you would hope to avoid or fear if AI was deployed without sufficient oversight and intentionality. But I think in an area that, Trooper, I know you and I talk about that really needs to be focused on, as well as how this is going to be playing out in the court systems. When we think about who is harmed, one facet of this is the liability. Some of the federal U.S. agencies have come out and been clear that if you're using AI, you are within their purview, even if you don't think so. I think it's really helpful that the EEOC has said we're actually looking at the users of AI, not necessarily the developers within our purview, and our civil rights laws and authorities do apply. So they've been intentional and thoughtful, but now you have this playing out in the court systems. And so I think a lot of people are using AI, not understanding the potential harms that they're creating. And we're going to see the litigation play out, who is liable economically, and each of those cases means someone has been harmed, either individually or in the corporate sense. And I'm hoping that the work that several of us are doing can help put people on notice to reduce those harms and liabilities before they play out.
Please, who's next? About Rumman.
I mean, what can I say besides to echo my fellow panelists? What I love about what everybody has talked about are really tangible real world examples, and maybe deviating from the exact question a little bit. I think sometimes concepts of responsible use or ethical use seem a bit abstract. They maybe seem like moral codes we adhere to, or principles or feelings. And I think on the other end, there is concern that, well, we're not going to be able to embody everyone's values and everyone's concerns. And what I love about all the examples everybody has given is either they are, first of all, things that we have clearly articulated in society that are unacceptable, right? Racism, sexism, etc., or they are things that specifically are defined by the law already. So one important conversation maybe to bring in here a bit is that what we are not doing is inventing everything brand new in this space. There are already clear guidelines about appropriate use of any sort of tool or product, and AI is just that. It is another tool or product. And it's important to have a starting base, as everyone sort of pointed out here, and given examples of, we have a starting point that existed even before AI started. So let's start there and let's see what might be needed on top of that.
And Erin, you're doing some amazing work in school systems, and talk to us about AI in schools and how you're trying to navigate it.
Yeah, so Innovate EDU leads the EdSafe AI Alliance, and this alliance is a global alliance that's focused at the nexus of AI and education. And the work that we do in districts, or whether it's work we do that with governments, is really underpinned by a framework that is a build upon, not just a build anew. It's an amalgamation of 24 different trust frameworks that consider some of the foundational layers that we need to consider for any type of tech. To Dr. Chowdhury's point, that there's sort of good principles of acceptable design, acceptable use, digital access, foundational layers of interoperability, cybersecurity, data privacy that we need to be stewards of. And so in the work that we do in our district policy labs, and we have 12 that are throughout the country, some in really big school districts like New York City, others in Cannon City, Colorado, a rural school district in the heart of Colorado. All of them are taking on problems of practice around AI and policy, and they're anchoring that work in the SAFE framework. And so the framework itself talks about how folks should think about safety, accountability, fairness, and transparency, and then only get to the use cases or the effective use of AI in education. And that foundational framework is important, not just because it's things that really matter in how we make effective policy and how we do good stewardship, but it also takes people through a logical progression. And so our perspective, especially when stewarding minor data, is that you have to start with safety, and you have to take on the data stewardship role that schools and districts have, and take that very seriously and understand the existing, I'm going to use my favorite term, regulatory undergirding, the things that sit below systems that are operating, whether you're in education or whether you're in social services, there are already a set of existing laws that you have to consider. So there shouldn't be an AI acceptable use policy, for example. AI should be considered in the drafting of a district's acceptable use policy. There shouldn't be a procurement framework for AI tools. There should be a procurement framework for instructional tools, which includes technology and AI, and is especially attentive to some of the questions that AI brings up for us, which are humans in the loop? Is this algorithm or machine learning interface amplifying human bias? And so how do we ask the specific questions that are about that feature or that tool set, while also considering the foundational issues that make, all systems sort of safe and accessible and inclusive? And so, I think AI can be overwhelming for people. Like, this is just another thing on my plate. What do I do? And really, we talk about sort of the underlying infrastructure that you need for good data, good systems, good work in this space, which includes being attentive to issues that many of folks on this call have already been attentive to: modernizing their data infrastructure, cybersecurity, interoperability. And then again, I think there's some work to do in that progression. Hope that's helpful.
Very helpful. And Lori, I mean, you've got a million and one things to do running your association with all these public servants, but please.
Well, I think, some for public health officials, for the staffs that serve in public health departments, the things that we care about on a normal day-to-day basis are going to be the things that we care about when we apply AI to the process or to the thinking. And that's, are we always being ethical? Are we protecting data? Personal data? Are we thinking about equitable access in other areas of equity in terms of even data sets, being used, especially because technology is not available equally to everybody everywhere. So does the introduction of AI create more health disparities by limiting who can access them, who can have access to them? The safety and accuracy of the information, we're already kind of coping with a mail disinformation environment in this country, and public health is right at that intersection of trying to tell the truth, but not being a very trusted part of the equation, because we're a government agency and a lot of people mistrust the government right now. So I'm really thinking about how AI can either help or hurt. That is something really at the top of our minds, because we have to be completely transparent about where AI models are getting their data and how these algorithms are or designed and by whom, because at the root of all of this is a person or persons in data. And then we have to think about, some of the new terminology. This human in the loop is always important, and making sure there's a person there. Public health is very focused on people and interacting with people and being compassionate and having a lot of empathy for their circumstances. And that kind of machine learning with the human and heart, is evolving and something to watch, certainly. I think finally, it does have unique application in the world of behavioral and mental health, where the old model was to talk with your therapist and to meet in a room, and a small room with another person that you barely know, and to shed everything that is causing you pain or hurt. And in some cases now, working with a machine model is actually proven to be more effective in helping people to shed some of their worries and concerns to a third party that doesn't have a judgment behind it necessarily. So it's a really interesting time. And I think we'll also have to look out for the hallucination of some of these AI models, and that are more in the evolving threshold, where AI is learning upon itself and that can create models where the AI hallucinates and makes up its own stuff. And so I'll put a nice bow on it and say that bias and really doing bias audits of AI systems is critical to help ensure some of these things are monitored.
Thank you. And would just like to, for our participants, for our guests, and if you have questions for our amazing panelists, please put them in the chat. So let me turn to an issue that many human service leaders and those who are leading and managing public benefits programs are grappling with. A hot button issue is the role of AI in public benefits and whether AI can be used or should be used to determine eligibility, whether someone will or won't receive public assistance. But we're also facing, and I would say we're also facing the reality of an overburdened system with extraordinary public servants trying to serve the public, but they are understaffed, under-resourced in many ways. How would you, and people are waiting too long to have their applications processed and receive an eligibility determination. How would you go about working through this issue of whether and how and when AI might be used in a sensitive area like eligibility for public benefits? Maybe Rumman or Erin? Yes.
I can hop in on it, but I feel like the other people on this call probably have more hands-on knowledge than I do. I just sort of know from the literature and sort of seeing other people who do this work. I think for a lot of it, it really just depends on, so like if I take a slightly cybersecurity approach to it, right? It's really thinking about what the impact is of the model that's being built, what is the potential for adverse outcomes, and then like what is the likelihood of adverse outcomes, and what is the adverse outcome, right? So I'll also add, bringing in like sort of a little bit of disability law in here, thinking through also like what is the tool that is being built? How does it compare to what exists today? And is there a very clear and specific need? And I say that, and I'll focus on the second part first. I think often there is some degree of excitement about AI, which is not unfounded, but also it is not, it's like a hammer and then everything starts to look like a nail, and not everything is a nail. So like that second part of it, just to figure like, is this really a nail? Is this really this entirely incredibly, quote, inefficient process that AI can do better? Or is it, quote, inefficient because, you know, you have people working directly with individuals who need care, they're customizing programs, et cetera. And to the first, there have already been studies about benefits like in Medicare and Medicaid, in particular in insurance, and some pretty disastrous situations where claims are being automatically denied. In particular, again, if you look at communities of people who are the most vulnerable, they're also the less likely to fit into this, quote, average person or the expected behavior. I say this because if we look at the examples of people whose claims were automatically denied, these were generally people of lower income, and these are people who were disabled. So persons with disabilities have different needs. If you're making like a typical fraud detection model, if there's anybody in the call who's sort of familiar with the early days of banking fraud detection model, or maybe you were just a customer who experienced this about 10 years ago when banks started first really doing these things, you literally couldn't leave the state without your credit card getting frozen because you like, you know, went to Connecticut to get gas and then you have to like pick up a phone call, and like because it was, quote, aberrant behavior. But yeah, you're human. You don't just do the same things every day. You sometimes take a road trip to like, yeah, right. But this was because banks were making these fraud detection models that were so hyper tuned to this idea of a functional form, and you have to do what the model is saying, and unless you're adhering to your expected predicted Monday to Friday behavior, it would go haywire. So now imagine that, which is which is annoying, right? Minor inconvenience to somebody whose whole life is not, quote, normal, right? They may be disabled, they may be bedridden, their expenses, their purchases, how they do things is totally different. And they're less able to advocate for themselves in this situation of insurance and disability. And that's why I raised this first part of thinking through the likelihood for harm, the impact it would have, and who it would impact.
Yeah, I would love to jump in here because I think modeling for variance is something that we are trying to encourage as many people as possible in the building of tools to think about. And centering the use case, I think, is very, very important. And when you do, again, the good work of centering the use case, talking to users, doing user-centered design, those are all things that we should be doing for any tool, any intervention, whether it's AI or not, helps us to understand how to model and build for variance. The other thing that I would say is we have to build a public good infrastructure. So I'm going to pull out my soapbox and jump on it. We have to build a public good infrastructure in sectors like education and social services where the market is not incented to build equitably. And so how do we test tools? How do we have nationally representative data sets? Where do we have nationally representative data sets that are underrepresenting our most marginalized populations? How do we build that at scale so that when industry is engaged, and they will be engaged, there is a set of infrastructure that they and we can verify and test against? And how do we embed those structures? And then the last thing I'll say is feedback loops are going to be really, really important in this work and in this development. And whether you're doing policy or you're doing tool building, thinking about what those loops look for and test for and model for is very, very important. So we have a superintendent in Santa Ana who's building the soup to nuts AI policy guidance right now in California, probably one of the most rigorous states, who's already put out guidance around data privacy, security, so on and so forth. And he's gotten his board to commit to revisiting their policy at the 4-month mark. That doesn't happen usually in public policy, and it doesn't happen in governance. And so that might seem not revolutionary for folks, but saying like, this is going to be changing, variance is going to be happening on the policy space, in the tool space, is going to be really, really important. And so I would just say, start with use cases, because then you can think about, again, what are the safety implications? What are the rights implications? And modeling for variance is really something we need to push developers to do. There is no average. That's what we know in learning and in brain science. And so we need to stop building to average.
That's great. Lori or Miriam?
Yeah, I think I love those points, Erin. And just to build on that a little bit, you know, again, I get back to the question of for whom could this fail? We don't want to miss out on the opportunities that AI can offer for, you know, in public benefits and in other areas. There's such an overwhelming workload. We understand that people are underwater. They're trying to do their best. Are there ways that AI could be helping them? Absolutely. Are there risks? Absolutely. Well, we can't answer the question there. We can't leave it there, and we can't leave it to each person to answer on their own. I think an important piece for us to think about is establishing good AI hygiene, talking about what it means to have good AI hygiene, making sure there's accountability, there's a leader who is accountable at the end of the day. We talked today about we think there's 5 main pieces of AI hygiene that everyone should adopt. And another one we talked about here is the iteration. It's great, Erin, that they're checking every 4 months. You know, there's going to need to be a check for the system at a routine cadence, and that cadence is going to depend on the use case. And it's hard to say it in that way because everyone wants a number. How often, how many checks do we have? And I wish we could give it. And hopefully in time, as we have more use cases, we can learn from one another. But I think at the end of the day, there's no way to get around from the fact that we need to have multi-stakeholder reviews and input in building and in testing the systems. You know, to the extent that we don't have sufficient diversity in building the AI, we need to fix that. And I know what you're doing, the school systems can be helpful there. But in the meantime, we need to be thinking about testing as an opportunity to stopgap some of those oversights. I think we have to realize that when we're talking about AI, there's not one area or one point in time when bias and other problems can weave into the AI system. We have to think about the entire AI lifecycle, and each human touch point is an opportunity for bias and other harms to embed. But each of those human touch points is an opportunity for us to rectify, identify, and mitigate that harm, to make it so that it is more inclusive and better adaptable to the users. And the bottom line is we can only imagine as broadly as our experience and our personal imagination can take us. And so you just can't get around having to bring in the end users and being really thoughtful about all the downstream users or those who could be implicated by your AI system, and making sure that it is safe for them, that it is working for them, and constantly reevaluating, are there new use cases and new users that could be implicated by this AI system, to make sure that they're in mind when you're thinking about the safety of the AI program.
And Lori.
Yeah, I love everything that's been said. I think that we definitely have to build these systems with human touches embedded in them. A trooper got to hear this story the last time I told it, but I am a person of fairly good means. I know I can kind of take care of problems easily. I have the time I can take off work to navigate when the system fails me. But a lot of people that are on the receiving end of benefits do not have these same things. They don't have anything. They don't have the luxury of time. They don't have the luxury of half of the things that I do. And my mortgage company made a mistake with AI, and it caused me much distress for 90 days. I had a mortgage that was ballooned by $1,500 a month due to an AI system not recognizing a rider in my insurance policy. And it took a long time for humans to come into the system to be able to help me. And I'm one person that can afford to deal with it. But I think systems have to be built with our constituents in mind, and with them as part of the solution as well. And if it's built for them, it should be built with them. That's an old motto from our maternal and child health world that we used to talk about. I think too, though, the reality of our world is that a lot of people need benefits. A lot of people need things from the government, and there isn't enough government. There aren't enough government workers. Our workforce is in decline, and we have low resources. So the promise of AI again is that it built properly with some human interaction, it can really actually help to supplement an area that has been really struggling, and that is just the ability to work through claims and all of these processes that can be bettered by technology if we're able to embrace it in the right way.
Okay, thank you for that. One additional question before we go to the audience for their questions. So Benefits Data Trust, we view this AI learning hub as very much interdisciplinary, where we believe, because Benefits Data Trust is interdisciplinary. We have data scientists and policy people. We have social workers and helpers. We have our amazing benefits outreach specialists. So it's really the gamut of professions. Can you, perhaps there may be some feelings that when you're talking about artificial intelligence, that's something best left to the computer scientists and data scientists and those on the technical side of life. But of course, human services and delivering public benefits is something that involves lots of disciplines. Never mind, a lot of people who lead these agencies probably went to school in things that are other than quantitative. Can you speak to the extent you agree or disagree, and what value having different voices, different disciplines at the table? And have you seen the benefit of that or not in areas of your work?
I can actually speak to that pretty directly. So first, I think there's so many parts of the question you just asked, and I think it embodies a lot of people's concerns who are not in the field of AI development. So the first part is, how can I, as somebody with subject matter expertise, engage people with technical expertise? So that's sort of part one. And we're seeing some good efforts coming out of the US government. For example, AI.gov is a big hiring portal. So, and this is just to point out the federal government. There are a lot of state, local initiatives. I think there are innovation groups popping up in a lot of nonprofits that I've been interacting with my nonprofit. So we're starting to see some of that hiring. And of course, I'm not going to pretend it's just as easy as Google hiring, right? Like there are certain gaps, et cetera, like the ability, like we can't pay Google salaries or, OpenAI salaries. That being said, I think the ability to have an applied mission and really focus technical skills on something that is useful and beneficial to society actually speaks to a lot of people. So that's part one. The second part of what you're saying, I think, is incredibly important because it has to do with power dynamics in the construct. The way I have seen these things work is when the companies and the organizations, or whoever, the technical people and the individuals with the subject matter expertise are on equal footing. And it's easy to say that. It is much harder to implement that. So it could be something like, if they are designing something together, there are collaborative review sessions where the person with the subject matter expertise has veto rights. Like there are ways to build it in. If it is like something just like a discussion or a discovery session, again, how do you create it so that the person with the subject matter expertise is coming in saying, I am also an educator in this room. I'm not just the one being talked at about technology. All too often, I've seen the dynamic as the technical person comes in and does a whole bunch of talks on this assumption that they need to bring everybody along on this AI journey. The reality of the situation, actually more often, is that the technical person needs to be brought along on this social mission journey to actually understand what people have tried. Because 100% of the time when I've seen the dynamic done right, the person who has subject matter expertise in the affected area will say something like, oh, we did something like this once. It wasn't AI, but it was something else. And this is what I learned, or here's why that didn't work, or here's how we can make that be successful. So it's a really good symbiotic relationship as opposed to just like one group talking at another one.
Thank you. Others have a perspective.
I think that when we talk about what everyone can do right now relative to AI, it's about building knowledge, not fear. And I think that every leader in every organization, no matter what seat you're sitting in, can build knowledge in your communities and in your sort of sphere of influence around AI, and demystifying technology, helping people understand where AI is already in their lives. Building knowledge, not fear, I think, is where we start with everyone, because we think foundational AI literacy matters for the world. And so, we just led National AI Literacy Day with our partners at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the National Science Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Education. And this groundswell that happened across the country with 60 local events, a student town hall, a parent town hall, was a clear signal that folks want to engage in this conversation and build their foundational literacy. And so the work that we're doing at EdSafe is really focused on AI as an arrival technology. That means that it's going to fundamentally reorder the way we access knowledge, the way we access expertise, the way we access opportunity. And so how do you get folks ready and contributing to that conversation? And so I would encourage, no matter what seat you sit in, to build knowledge, not fear, and to really look to de-silo those conversations. And when we do that, when we take away fear, we see opportunity. And so that's something that every leader, no matter if they wear the CTO or the CEO hat, can do today.
Thank you for that. Stephen, should we go to some questions?
Yeah, we have a number of great questions in the Q&A, and if there's any more, feel free to do so. This is one that's I think near and dear to BDT's heart. How do you see AI supporting families with access to early childhood care and education programs like childcare, Head Start, pre-K, etc.? How might state agencies use AI to approach these programs?
Would like that.
I feel like Erin's the person to answer this. Otherwise, I always answer questions. So I think you should answer it, Erin.
I mean, I'm happy to take it as a mom who had to navigate finding childcare in New York City. Just even knowing what my options were, how much they cost, all information that's relatively static. How can we make it easier, again, to look at opportunity, and how can we help folks identify places where it's not just, I think, early childhood, but even for our young people who want opportunity in after school programs, or navigating the incredible opportunities that might be in their community for work-based learning or time in a museum. Again, I think the green use case for me so much right now in education is about making the invisible visible. And we have to think about all the static information that sat in college catalogs or a FAFSA foreign trooper. I know you guys are doing some of that work, or is sitting in, the thing that's online that takes 15 to 20 minutes to load the pages. How do we help people access static information to make it more usable and consumable for them? And building chatbots that take static information and are trained in something that we call small language models or closed language models is a relatively inexpensive thing that you can do to take the knowledge that your organization might have or have access to, and to make it more accessible, to de-jargonize it, to translate it. And so in early childhood in particular, there's some great work happening at Stanford, frankly, and like some of the findings around early childhood education, and we should be paying attention to those studies and what we're learning from research. But I think even if we can just find ways for people to access the programs that are in their neighborhoods, or gain access to programs that are close to work or job or with variable hours, it could be really helpful. As a working mom myself, I've had to navigate that journey, and it's hard.
I would just also add maybe some, those are great examples. And I remember my husband and I splitting up. We have twins, and splitting up when they had to go to daycare just to try to get on a wait list. So from a process perspective, even, things like managing wait lists, managing application forms, really trying to ease how you search for complete documents and that sort of thing, I think is part of this, just the retrieval of information across systems. As I'm thinking about sort of the childhood education part too, and certain components like children with special health care needs, and the parents that have to navigate up to 30 different systems of care for a very complex medical condition. These are the areas where we really streamline and improve the systems with AI to allow that accessibility, that ease of accessibility to really shine through technology.
And I think, absolutely on the efficiencies and ways to create more opportunities. There's so many answers to this question. I think part of the challenge in answering is where do you begin? But, I also, as a mother, have to say one of the reasons I got into this space in the first place was because of my daughters. And I don't think we can underestimate how important it is at a young age that we expose children to an understanding of technology. Now, that's not to say that we want technology in all the schools, or even could afford or should do it at the early education levels. But I do think that, just in watching my daughters and their friends, by the time they left lower school, they'd already decided, I am history, I am English, I am a soccer player. Now, you still have a window in middle school, upper school. It's not to say the door is closed, but I think we forget how quickly identities form. And I think we're overlooking the opportunity to really democratize the education and the ways that AI could be a benefit in the education space and in the human empowerment space, if we're not thinking about how AI can make numbers fun, how it correlates with math, how it can be a really important, helpful teaching tool, and in a minimum, making sure that kids understand where AI is impacting them already, because I think we have to be thinking about AI literacy and the world in which they're not only going to live in, but live in currently. And we're doing them a real disservice if we're not thinking about educational institutions as a place to democratize opportunity.
Absolutely. Stephen, next question.
Yes, and the questions have started to pour in, and unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them. But this is an interesting one on how much community voice and feedback have you asked for in the development of AI, like in talking about beneficiaries or the folks who are taking advantage of the services in particular. Maybe do you have some examples that you could point to?
At the risk of taking out the questions, I'm happy to talk about putting students at the center of this conversation, because our youth are wise and they are all using AI, many of them. And if we're not figuring out a way to center their conversations. So we have a student policy lab that's part of the New York City Public Schools Policy Lab, which is an amazing group of students from a diverse set of schools in Brooklyn. And led by an innovative superintendent, Stephen Pryor, over there. He's amazing. And one of the things that our young people in doing work in the policy lab have said is, you have to help teach my immigrant father that every time I use the internet, I'm not cheating. And when Jada said that in the policy lab conversation, it changed the frame by which folks were thinking about cheating or plagiarism as the educational use case. It's how can we build foundational literacies to understand critical thinking and deeper learning? Or, you know, in some of the policy lab work that we're doing in some other places, young people talking about how do you help me gain access to opportunities that aren't just available at my high school? How could I take AP English or AP Computer Science or AP Physics and have an AI tutor that could sit alongside me so that I could take a class virtually and then have somebody who can provide that just-in-time support? And so I think this is one of the places where if you are intentional in centering users and listening to community and creating those feedback loops, wisdom lives in many places, and we have to create that opportunity for wisdom to come forward and for folks to ask for what they need.
I can also chime in. So I work on something a little bit different. I work on something called red teaming. So red teaming was originally from the military. It's used in cybersecurity. And traditionally what red teaming looks like is external experts are brought in to test the security of a piece of software, right? Can you hack it to give you a password or steal data? So with artificial intelligence, red teaming looks a little bit different because the ways in which models break are different, right? So you can unintentionally have something bad happen. Intentionally, it can happen, like there can be a bad person trying to do things. So, but with the unintentional world, red teaming now takes on a different phase. So what red teaming looks like is understanding people's lived experiences and going to them to help critique and analyze these AI models. So there's a couple of things that happen when we do these events. I've done quite a few of them. My organization, Humane Intelligence, did the largest ever one with all the different AI model companies last year at this hacker conference called DEF CON. But the ones I'm actually the most proud of are some of the smaller ones. We did one with COVID and climate scientists at the Royal Society on scientific mis and disinformation. And we also did one with architects and engineers thinking through, with Autodesk University at Autodesk, thinking through the future of the profession of architecture. So the dynamic of red teaming starts to be more of this equal footing that I was talking about, right? So you are the expert because you are an architect, you're a teacher, you're a student, you're a public administrator, you know your world. And I set up an environment so that you're being asked to find ways in which this AI can fall apart based on your lived experience or your understanding of like the industry that you're in. And what's really fascinating is two things. One, Erin, this gets at what you're talking about with critical thinking, right? The thing people are scared of is not artificial intelligence. It's actually not being able to discern when artificial intelligence is breaking or going wrong or something bad is happening, right? Because as Lori said, like even if you're able to self-advocate in your situation, you knew something went wrong, right? And you knew that you could call them and you could do stuff. But what if you didn't know something even went wrong with an AI system, right? You were denied a job and you're like, I guess I was just denied a job, right? You didn't know. So with these systems, I'm sorry, with these red teaming events, first of all, people are less scared of AI. Erin, like nod to you and everything you've been saying, right? They're like, oh, if I can break it, then I kind of get it, right? What was interesting about the architecture one is they were sort of testing the upper limits of it. They're like, okay, we can make these cool images, but it's not going to replace an architect because it doesn't do A, B, C, D, and E. But then people get really optimistic. So what's the thing that I didn't realize was going to happen at these events is it wasn't like this like sad, angry thing where everyone's like, oh my God, AI is broken. Actually, what happens when they find out how the system breaks is human beings go into their natural mode, which is to want to fix things. And they're like, well, what if we had an AI that did this? And what if we had an AI that did that? So you've opened this floodgates of, even though they know they're not an AI expert, because they have entered into this room on equal footing and they've been treated like an expert by design, and they've used their expertise to find issues, their next logical step, given their subject matter knowledge, is to say, what can I do to fix this? And what's really interesting, so I'll give you an anecdote from the COVID and climate scientists one. One of the things they said was that AI models are, they have a lot of safety and security around COVID. So if you can't get a lot of misinformation on COVID, you can ask the same question of measles, mumps, or the flu, and actually it can spit out misinformation. And this information went directly to the company we worked with, and they actually fixed this stuff. So there was certainly the sense of ownership, like I found this, I fixed this. And also it was helpful to the company. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to make that feedback loop, but it's specifically designed around these critical analysis type challenges, which, as I mentioned, have this direct impact of companies improve their models, but have this indirect impact of people feel like they've gained critical thinking knowledge and they're less scared of AI systems.
That is great. That is great. Well, thank you for that. Well, we're almost out of time, so I want to ask one lightning round question and then turn to Stephen to wrap us up. So I don't know about you, but I have like an infinite stack of things to read, absorb, etc., just to try to keep up with the world of AI. For our audience, what's the like one book, podcast, back of a milk carton, whatever resource that you use to try to stay sharp and up to date on AI?
Oh, that's a tough one. I want to hear your answer, Trooper.
Miriam Vogel, everything Miriam Vogel says.
We do have a fun podcast. We just interviewed Scott Galloway. It'll be up next week. It's called In AI We Trust ? And I learned so much from each of the speakers we have on. I think the Stanford AI Index is a helpful indicator of what the trends are in this space. I think listening to Pivot podcast is a really helpful overview. I know I'm giving more than one. And Axios, Ina Fried's daily AI overview are very helpful as well.
Great. Others?
I'm going to plus one Axios. And so I would say there are specific journalists to follow. There are some people who've been in the space for a while, so they're less enamored or like they see AI less romantically than I think maybe some people who are new. So Kari Johnson, who was at Wired, he is now at Cal Matters. They've just made a partnership with ProPublica, which is very interesting if you're into the data journalism space. ProPublica is another outlet that I would take anybody at ProPublica. If you read the Washington Post, Will Aremus. If you read Wired, Will Knight. Natasha Tiku, who is at the New York Times, I want to say. Oh no, Washington Post. And then anybody at 404 Media. 404 Media is like the most critical source of truth. I think, so I know some of them personally. They're the people who used to do Motherboard advice before it got shut down. So I would say in terms of the spectrum of like the people who are the most critical, like 404 Media, they are not here to play. They are like taking names. And I love it because we do need that critical analysis, but told from a factual perspective.
Great.
It's about to be sort of summer vacation for lots of folks, maybe educators or others who are taking their kids on break. So I'm going to go with two books, Balancing the Promise and the Peril So pack these in your beach bag. Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick is an amazing book. And then so that's the promise. And then the peril, Barbara McQuaid's new book, Attack from Within, I think is a really critical conversation about misinformation, disinformation, and public sentiment that is really resonating with me right now. Lori?
So I try to go to the Consumer Electronics Show at the start of every year to kick things off, and AI was theme of their show this year. So that was healthy. Reading a lot, but also listening to my members, listening to my health departments, what's going on at their level that they need help with, that they could use new technology with, and how they're currently using it really helps me.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. You are brilliant. I'm sure this has really helped not only the folks who've watched now, but the other leaders and folks for the field. And Stephen, I'll turn it to you to close this out.
Yeah, for any of those kinds of resources and lots more, we encourage you to join us in the Learning Hub as part of the AI Learning Hub. You can either do that on your mobile device. We put the link in the chat. Some of the questions that we didn't get to today, I will put them in the Learning Hub and we'll continue the conversation there. And we'll try and get some of those questions answered. So please join us over there. And again, yes, thanks everybody for coming and thanks for a great conversation to our panelists.